all systems, especially the so-called justice system, because there's not a lot of justice in that system for us as we see. So shouts out to my ancestors, my grandparents who helped raise me, my aunties, my cousins, my supporters. Shout out to our ancestors who made this country. My prayers and blessings go out to the families of those that have been slain by police due to racism and systematic oppression. My prayers go out to the families of even my clients and others that are afraid to speak out against oppression when it comes from people that look like me. So I have a statement that I'm going to read because you guys want to hear something in PC terms, so I'm going to give it to you that way. But then after we're done, I'm going to give it to you in the terms that my hood jurors like, so you can understand. So, to the whole world, Hood Court is now in session. Welcome to Hood Court with Judge Tip. This is the statement that I'm going to read. These are my clients, the family that stands behind my client, Michael Keith, and I also stand here for our other clients, John Doe number 2 and John Doe number 3. So, growing up in a Baptist church, I used to read the announcements as a kid. So I would read from the board, but I was always very good at it. So this speech that's prepared, I'm going to read it to you, but I'm going to do it very well. So listen up. As parents, we raise our children in homes free from abuse. We work tirelessly to protect them from the harm of the world. We help them through the tiny years of learning to walk and speak and love. We watch them grow. We teach them right from wrong, respect, and consideration for their fellow man. We tell them that they are loved and protected. We take on the monumental task of trying to educate them on the horrors of our world without damaging them. We do this by telling them that no one is allowed to hurt them. No one is allowed to make them feel victimized. The greatest hurdle that parents face is teaching their children about abuse. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse. We celebrate their graduations, help them plan the next steps to go to college, their first exposure to the real world. Our children look at colleges for the friends they will have, the freedom they will experience, and the future that their college choice will lay the foundation for. Parents look at the future too, but with a mindful eye on the safety and security of their babies. We may want them to live on campus where they are in a bubble of protection from the harms that might befall them. We want them near the security and cover that should come with being in the campus environment. The day comes when our children look grown but are still so very much young and naive. I went to Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida as a 17-year-old young girl, very naive. Parents have an unspoken promise from schools that they will do everything they can to protect these young lives while in their care. Morehouse failed in that obligation. They knowingly and willingly allowed predators to remain on campus preying on the young men entrusted to their care. Morehouse has created a generational environment of oppression of young black men. This is a far cry from the image built by William Jefferson, Augusta, when in 1867 he founded Augusta Baptist Institute, which would later become Morehouse. His purpose was to educate newly free male slaves. His purpose was to educate newly freed male slaves, to raise up his people to fulfill the potential they all house inside. Morehouse would educate great men like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who would be the spark that lit the civil rights movement, the flame that fanned the fire of equality and justice, and the fuel that burned a nation's need for the end of oppression of black men and women. The Morehouse of Dr. King's days no longer exists, and the legacy Dr. King has left for Morehouse has been robbed by their own systematic oppression of young black men, the very foundation of what William Jefferson Augusta and Dr. King were fighting to eliminate. So what y'all think about that, Hoodgers? Michael Key applied to and was accepted into Morehouse. He looked to the future he could achieve as a Morehouse man. He went with a head and a heart full of dreams about being a lawyer, helping to fight the injustices of our world. Mr. Key embraced the opportunity to have the full college experience by living on campus, where he would be at the center of Morehouse culture. But Morehouse showed him in education in the very injustice he sought to fight. He was sexually harassed and assaulted by DeMarcus Cruz, the interim director of housing and residential education. Mr. Cruz held a position of authority over Mr. Keys as dean of Mr. Keys' dorm, and Mr. Cruz, a Morehouse administrator, used that authority to stalk, sexually harass, and sexually assault Mr. Key over the period of nearly a year. Mr. Cruz, a sexual predator, implemented a course of conduct intended to groom Mr. Key for an intimate relationship with Mr. Cruz. Despite ongoing attempts by Mr. Key to avoid Mr. Cruz, repeatedly informing Mr. Cruz that his advances were unwanted and unwelcome, and even filing formal complaints against Mr. Cruz with Morehouse. But you know what happened? The harassment and assaults continued. Mr. Key sought relief from the administration at Morehouse, only to be re-victimized by Morehouse refusal to act upon his complaints and further harass him by not only forcing him to attend meetings with his abuser, but allowing his abuser to maintain unrestricted access to the college campus, where Mr. Cruz could freely continue his victimization of Mr. Key. Morehouse would only compound the harm caused to Mr. Key by retaliating against him for coming out about the abuse. You know what Morehouse did? They refused him re-enrollment for his junior year, with the full knowledge of the lasting impact their actions would have on Mr. Key and his future goals. John Doe number 1 also came to Morehouse with plans for his future. Mr. Doe had aspirations of becoming a Morehouse man and going on to medical school, where he wanted to be an orthopedic doctor. He too fell victim to Mr. Cruz. He's so embarrassed that he does not want you to know his name, because he's a black man, and black men aren't supposed to be gay. Black men are supposed to fight off a predator, but that's simply not what happens in the real world. John Doe number 1 would be stalked by Mr. Cruz, harassed, assaulted, and even be victimized by others on campus at the behest of Mr. Cruz. He would be slandered on campus, his reputation endlessly degraded. He would only last a year under Mr. Cruz's efforts to groom him for a homosexual relationship. Mr. Cruz would intentionally discriminate against Mr. Doe's sexual orientation as a measure of retaliation against Mr. Doe, rebuffing his sexual advances by forcing him to house with a group of young men Mr. Doe expressly requested not to be housed with. Further, Mr. Cruz would force Mr. Doe to room with individuals who made Mr. Doe feel sexually uncomfortable with the full knowledge that his actions would result in the discomfort for Mr. Doe. Mr. Cruz's victimization and retaliation against Mr. Doe finally drove him to move off campus and into the home of a family friend. Mr. Doe would alter his daily life to avoid Mr. Cruz, and yet, through Mr. Cruz's relentless stalking, Mr. Doe could never be fully free of forced encounters with Mr. Cruz. Morehouse would have little more than the same response to Mr. Doe as they had to Mr. Key. Now, with the second complaint against the same predator and details exhibiting a pattern of predatory behavior, they still failed to act to protect the entirety of their student body from Mr. Cruz. I still got to look pretty. I'm sweaty. Okay. John Doe number 2 was spared the systematic abuse unleashed by Mr. Cruz. He would fall victim to another member of the Morehouse staff, Maynard Scarborough, when he was subjected to non-consensual sexual contact. Mr. Scarborough also used his position of authority to prey on this young man. Morehouse would once again fail to act upon notification of the assault to protect the victim and student body from a sexual predator. And while these acts of attrition are more than enough to warrant action, it doesn't stop here. It continues. The marathon continues, as they say. Currently, there is yet another action against Morehouse in its admin by another young man who was sexually harassed and assaulted by a professor while on a school-sanctioned trip out of the country. Your power down. Every historically black college and university, no, matter of fact, every single institution of higher learning, remember Penn State in Sandusky, Ohio. So every institution of higher learning needs to direct their attentions to this issue. It's not just a black thing at HBCUs. It's not just a white thing such as Penn State. It is a human thing. It's a heart thing. It's a love thing that we need to look at. Every institution needs to be looking in their own backyards, because while fighting, this fight is with Morehouse and the predators that they protected, it is a fight that rings through every single campus on America. Morehouse is not isolated in the oppression that has occurred. They are the public reckoning of the harassment and abuse that has been occurring at colleges and universities across our nation for decades. The time is now. Morehouse is just as guilty as the predators it employed. By failing to act swiftly and with the authority given to them, they failed the young men in their care and created an environment where sexual predators could live out their deviances unchecked. So, just like the uncle who the family let slide and didn't call the police, he continued on because they wanted to sweep it under the rug. This is the same thing happening on our campuses with our college kids. These predators acted with confidence under the belief that their victims, young black men, would never tell, or wouldn't even be believed. Because what does this country think of young black men? We already know. We already know what they think. They knew that they would never be believed because they were young black men attending a college where the admin has exhibited a history of covering up these abuses. It is through Morehouse's own inaction that they have become conspirators in the harassment and abuse inflicted on these young victims by their own administrators and staff and predators who acted brazenly and without remorse as they groomed and goaded these young men to fall victim to their depraved sexual desires. It is a duty of every college and university to put a stop to the prolific and unconscionable abuse of our young men and women, to speak out against the oppression that keeps these young people silenced about the abuses that they are enduring, and to pay the price when they fail to honor that duty to our black youth. Every parent who is considering sending their child to a historically black college or university like Morehouse needs to be watching, needs to be listening, needs to be learning, needs to do their own research, needs to Google Tiffany M. Simmons, needs to Google Simmons Law, the undefeated law firm, the law firm of this generation, and know for yourself and figure out the truth for yourself, because I stand on the truth. They need to know the environment they are sending their children into, a place where they will not be there to protect them. They need to know if their institution is going to do what protects their image or what protects their students, the souls of their students, over the image of a university. Every parent needs to be aware that the substantial risk of their child being sexually abused or assaulted while on campus, like Morehouse, is significant until every institution of higher education serving our youth ensures the adoption and compliance with policies and procedures from having authority over any young person. But it should not stop there. Every parent should demand that the administration enact the very governance adopted to ensure their child's protection. Title IX needs to be reformed. And every parent should hold these institutions, administrators, faculty, and staff accountable when they fail to enforce those policies, like we hold Morehouse accountable today. It is time we as a society stand up against this oppression. Every black youth should be free in their pursuit of higher education, free from the fear of abuse by the very people they depend on for guidance and protection, free from the anxiety and stress of being on a campus where they are not safe and not free to grow into strong young men and women. Morehouse has a responsibility to every single student on their campus to hire and supervise employees who will upload those freedoms. Morehouse not only failed to do that, they condone the very abuses they should have prohibited. And now is the time that they answer for the destructive decisions that they have made. Today is the day that they will be held accountable. So people, the world, I bring to you Hood Court Live because you know Judge Tip, you know I make my ruling. So this is what my ruling would be for this case. Morehouse College will gladly accept $300 million because we asked for less, but they deserve $300 million, $100 million for each person. Michael Key, John Doe number 1, John Doe number 2. Because $300 million is just a fraction of what their souls is worth. Because they have to live with what happened to them every single day of their life, even as I do. Live with what happened to me. And I can be dressed pretty, I can be dressed ugly, I can be an undefeated attorney, I can be a hood girl, I can be whatever you call me, but don't call me broke. You can call me free, because this profession doesn't make me. I've made my mark in the profession. So just know, after Morehouse begs us to take $300 million or more, I am retiring as the undefeated attorney because God has moved me to do other things. So I don't do this for fame. I don't do this for clout. I do this from love. So now I will allow my clients to speak, co-counsel to speak, and then we'll wrap up Hood Court so I can explain what I just read in layman's terms for my hood jurors that support Judge Tip in Hood Court. So let me do as I do and get my gavel, because the case against Morehouse is closed. In case it is not dismissed, you are liable to our clients. Go ahead and run us that check.
All right. How's everybody doing?
Hey.
Yeah. So I know it's been a minute since y'all have heard me speak about this. You know, it's been a pretty rough journey thus far. But I just want to say this is bigger than a Morehouse problem. This is something that's occurring all over the world. But today I want to specifically speak about how this is something that is also happening in the entire AUC. So in order for us to, get over things like this, in order for us to overcome these type of issues that happen in the universities, it starts with the administration willing to hold everyone accountable. No matter how long they've worked there, no matter what their position is, because we do notice that a lot of people in power are the ones who are doing what's going on right now. So what I'm asking today is that, from this point forward, not only students at Morehouse, not only students at Clark, Spelman, but students all around the world. If you see anything like this going on, if someone tells you something about this that's happening, I encourage you to speak up about it. If you feel like your voice is not going to be heard, I encourage you to speak to someone you're comfortable with, and they can help you overcome this as well. But the overall goal is for this to end. The overall goal is for people to be held accountable no matter what position they hold or what kind of power they have. And this goes for students as well. So for all of the victims out there, I believe you, I stand with you, and I hope that we can make this something that is normal. Make speaking out something normal, right? Because I feel like at this point, sexual assault is normal. Our voices not being heard is what's being normalized. So let's normalize what's right. Let's normalize exposing these students, right? I don't care if they're your brothers. I don't care if they're your sisters. I don't care if it's your aunt, your uncle. Let's expose these people. In order for Morehouse or any of these institutions to be great, we have to get rid of the bad seeds. We have to remove what's causing our institutions to be bad, right? And just because we're black men does not mean we don't feel the same. We all feel the same. We have experiences just like other people. But it's time for our voices to be heard, as well as our black women. But if we're doing this to our own people, we'll never overcome this. If we're protecting our own brothers, we'll never overcome this. Jody, I stand with you. Claire, I stand with you. All the victims of Alake, I stand with y'all. I love y'all and I'm here for y'all. I love y'all. That's all I have to say.
All right. Mike's dad. I just want to say, there's an old saying that abused people abuse people, right? We carry that same logic. These kids that people don't know where they came from when they go to Morehouse and be taught to be Morehouse men are taught a certain culture and a certain amount of pride and dignity. Now, if we want this culture to go somewhere so they can become these Morehouse men that I see on the walls when I went there and I heard all the soliloquies about the speeches and how they talk, then basically what they're saying is pride, dignity, report these things, talk about these things. But instead they're empowering the people that's over these people that they're trying to teach the empowerment to. So if you want to stop the abuse, remember, broken people break other people. So basically we have a broken system of people that are being broken by other people that are breaking the people that's coming in. So how do you expect to make any real change if you don't stop that culture? So basically the culture is going on and on and on. Broken people break broken people. So you bring people in, you teach them this, you break them, then you silence them. Since they don't feel like they have any help or any voice, they go somewhere and they break somebody else too. So that's pretty much all I got to say.
Dr. King said that the time is always right to do what is right. Malcolm X said wrong is wrong regardless of who's doing it and who's saying it. So today, before the close of business, we believe that Dr. King and Malcolm have asked us to do something. And that is to file suit against Morehouse College and all of those that are involved. We represent Mr. Key and John Doe number 1 and John Doe number 2 because of the events that happened to them. We will be suing them based upon a breach of contract action, for violation of Title IX to include the sexual harassment of the conspiracy that Morehouse set up to conceal and hide what was going on against Mr. Key and our other 2 clients. We will be there, waiting for them to respond. We will be representing our clients to the best of our ability. We want you to know, Morehouse, that we're looking at you, the world is looking at you, and we look for our day in court.
So to wrap this up, I am now talking to my hood jurors, those that support me, understand me, and they get me. I'm gonna wrap this up, and I want to also speak to our elders. You looking for Malcolm, you looking for Michael, you're looking for all these leaders who had their time and paved the way for the next leaders. Your next leaders are here. Your next leaders are here. So get behind us and support us. Get behind us and support us because we are here. We're here. And that's all that I have to say. Thank you so much for being here. And we look forward to receiving that $300 million so I can go ahead and retire as the Mayweather of this shit. Bye, y'all.
That check.